the Subcommittee on East Asia and Pacific Affairs. Our hearing today will be to evaluating the U.S. policy on Taiwan on the 35th anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act. Let me say from the outset, I know that Senator Rubio will be joining me shortly. He indicated he may be a few minutes late getting here. I know Senator Murphy will also be joining me. There's a great deal of interest, I can assure you, in the United States Senate and on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on the U.S.-Taiwan relations. It's been some time since we've held a hearing. I think it was 1999, the last hearing that we held on Taiwan. So this is a particularly important hearing. I say from the beginning, on an apologetic note, this is a pretty busy time in the United States Senate. As this committee is meeting, two other committees that I serve on are holding markups on legislation, including Senate Finance Committee and Environment and Public Works Committee. So for the sake of the people of Maryland who I represent, I'm going to have to dodge out of here during the hearing to offer certain amendments that are important to not only Marylanders but to our country. So I apologize to the witnesses that I will not be here for the entire hearing, but I can assure you that the importance of this hearing is top on our agenda. And I thank all of our witnesses for being here and for their participation in this hearing. Last month, the subcommittee held a hearing on the alliance, our alliances in Northeast Asia. So today we will be evaluating another important part of our rebalance to Asia, the relationship that we have with Taiwan. On April 10, 1979, Congress enacted the Taiwan Relations Act, a bill designed to help maintain peace, security, and stability in the Western Pacific and to promote foreign policy of the United States by authorizing the continuation of commercial, cultural, and other relations between the people of the United States and the people of Taiwan. The Act also led to the establishment of the American Institute of Taipei. 35 years later, the framework provided by this legislation continues to govern U.S. policy in the region. Taiwan has been and remains one of our most important partners in Asia. Taiwan has a vibrant democracy, shares common values with the United States, boasts an advanced economy, and serves as a strong security partner and leader in the region. Within this context of shared values, let me just note that within our thriving democracy there will be disagreements and there will be differences of opinion among people, as we've seen recently in Taiwan. Democracies allow for this kind of vigorous political dialogue. Through constructive and peaceful discussions with all sides, these differences can be resolved. Taiwan is the 12th largest U.S. trading partner. Thousands of people visit the United States from Taiwan each year, contributing over $1.2 billion to the U.S. economy in 2012. And on a personal note, let me say the relationship between the people of Maryland and the people of Taiwan has been very strong. The commerce that goes through the port of Baltimore in Taiwan is very important to the economy of our region. And as President May has demonstrated leadership and creativity in handling and resolving disputes with Taiwan's neighbors, particularly with the historical agreement in 2012 between Japan and Taiwan over the fishery resources near the Senkaku Islands. This agreement serves as an important model for the region and indicates the important role Taiwan can and should play on the international stage. My colleagues in both the Senate and House have supported a role for Taiwan within the international stage. I was pleased to co-sponsor legislation introduced last year in the Senate to further this goal by directing the Department of State to develop a strategy to obtain observer status for Taiwan in an international civil aviation organization. I hope we see positive progress in this area. We also see a growing and positive relationship between Taiwan and the People's Republic of China over the last 6 years. Taiwan and PRC has signed 21 economic or functional agreements, including the Economic Cooperation Framework Agreement. In February, officials from Taiwan and PRC in charge of cross-strait affairs held their first formal meeting since 1949, opening the doors for further communication. There is progress being made for security in that region. The United States has long welcomed steps such as these to improve relationships and reduce tensions. And we certainly hope cross-strait relations progress will continue on a positive trajectory. Although relations have improved, we continue to see an expansion of the People's Republic of China's military capabilities, often aimed at Taiwan, and this is troubling. In this context, the U.S.-Taiwan security relationship must remain a priority. The challenges and opportunities in the region have changed since 1979. Nevertheless, the TRA continues to provide a solid foundation to guide our policy. The United States has an interest in maintaining a peaceful, prosperous, and secure East Asia, and recognizing this, the Obama administration has made a commitment to rebalance towards Asia. The United States' relationship with Taiwan is a critical piece in this strategy, and as such, it is important for the United States government, both the executive and legislative branches, to regularly reaffirm our enduring commitment to Taiwan. As I mentioned earlier, the last time this committee held a hearing on Taiwan Relations Act was 1999. Today provides an important opportunity to assure our partners that the United States remains committed to this important relationship. So I look forward to hearing from both of our panels today as to how the current state of affairs are between Taiwan and the United States and how that fits into the rebalance to Asia and security and prosperity within that region. We've been joined by Senator Murphy, and as I explained earlier, Senator Murphy will take the gavel a little bit later on in this hearing, and I thank him for being here and would yield if he would like to make some opening comments.
Looking forward to hearing from the witness.
Thank you. Our first panel, we're pleased to have Mr. Daniel Russell. He's no stranger to this committee. He's appeared before our committee on several occasions, the Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of East Asia and Pacific Affairs at the Department of State. Mr. Russell began his tour as Assistant Secretary on July 13th. In 2013, he previously served at the White House as Special Assistant to the President and National Security Staff Senior Director for Asian Affairs. I know that Secretary Russell is going to be very busy with the President's planned trip to Asia coming up shortly. I know that he'll be very busy planning to make sure that visit is as productive as possible in our rebalance to Asia. Secretary Russell, it's a pleasure to have you. As is the custom of this committee, all the witnesses' full statements will be made part of the record, and you may proceed as you wish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Senator Murphy, for this opportunity to testify on U.S.-Taiwan relations. The U.S. relationship with Taiwan is based on the 3 joint communiques and the Taiwan Relations Act, the TRA, which, as you noted, was signed into law 35 years ago next week. The framework that Congress established in the TRA has fostered the development and resilience of our relations with Taiwan over the past 35 years. The U.S.-Taiwan relationship is grounded in history, in shared values, and our common commitment to democracy and human rights. Taiwan and the TRA enjoyed genuine bipartisan support. The Taiwan caucus in the Senate and House contains 1/4 of sitting senators and representatives, divided about equally by party, and I think that's important. I'm here to report that the U.S.-Taiwan unofficial relations have never been better. Let me give you 4 reasons why. First, we share prosperity. Taiwan is now our 12th largest trading partner and has invested almost $8 billion in the U.S. That creates jobs here. Second, we learn from each other. Taiwan is the 6th largest sender of students to the United States. Third, we each have an interest in promoting and improving cross-strait relations. The enduring U.S. support for Taiwan and for its self-defense helps give Taiwan the confidence to strengthen its relations with the PRC, which in turn supports regional peace and stability. Fourth, we work together. We work together in the international community. For example, Taiwan's quick assistance to the Philippines after Typhoon Haiyan complemented U.S. relief efforts there. Taiwan is one of the world's largest economies. Taiwan is a focus market under the Commerce Department's Select USA program to promote investment in the United States. Consultations tomorrow under our Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, TIFA talks, offer the prospect of important progress supporting U.S. stakeholders, supporting President Ma's own economic reforms, and importantly, supporting the diversification of Taiwan's economy. Congress created the American Institute in Taiwan, AIT, in part to advance these economic ties as well as cultural ties. And this strategy has worked. Taiwan now sends more students to the U.S. than Japan or than Mexico. Taiwan also participates in about 60 international organizations as well as hundreds of international non-government organizations. The United States supports Taiwan's membership in international organizations that do not require statehood for membership and meaningful participation in others. Congress, with strong bipartisan and bicameral votes, supported Taiwan's participation in the Triennial International Civil Aviation Organization, the ICAO Assembly last year, in the resolution that you co-sponsored. We welcome Taiwan's participation and we support Taiwan's expanded participation in the future. We also encourage the United Nations, its agencies, and other international organizations to increase Taiwan's participation in technical or expert meetings. And as I said, Taiwan's role as a responsible global player is shown by its disaster relief efforts. Taiwan was quick to contribute to the initial search in the South China Sea for Malaysian Airlines 370 and quickly provided assistance to other nations following Typhoon Haiyan. Simply put, Taiwan is a reliable partner and a capable friend who contributes to regional peace and security. Mr. Chairman, the maintenance of peace across the Taiwan Strait is crucial to stability and prosperity throughout the Asia-Pacific. The Obama administration has notified over $12 billion worth of arms sales to Taiwan, a testament to how seriously we take our obligation to assist Taiwan in maintaining a sufficient self-defense force. Beyond arms sales, the United States engages in a wide range of important security consultations and exchanges in order to assist Taiwan armed forces as they maintain, train, and equip themselves. I am convinced, as I said, that strong U.S. support for Taiwan helps give our friends the confidence to strengthen cross-strait relations. We welcome those improved relations in trade, travel, science, and other forms of cooperation unimaginable a decade ago. They benefit both sides, they benefit regional security, they benefit the U.S. relationship with China, and they benefit our unofficial relations with Taiwan. And to reiterate our long-held position, resolution of differences across the strait must be peaceful and without coercion in accordance with the wishes of the people on both sides. So thank you for allowing me to help mark the 35th anniversary of the TRA. The U.S. sees a future of increased cooperation and flourishing unofficial relations between the people of the United States and the people of Taiwan. Thank you.
Well, again, Secretary Russell, thank you for your service. Thank you for your testimony. The language that you used in regards to the cross-strait issues is very similar to the maritime security issues, that we want these issues resolved, direct discussions among the parties involved peacefully, with respect for the rights of all the people in the region. So I couldn't agree with you more. I mentioned in my opening statement the agreement reached between Taiwan and Japan in regards to fishing rights. Can we learn something from the way that Taiwan and Japan handled that particular issue that could be helpful in dealing not just with the cross-strait issues, but dealing with maritime security problems in that region?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you that that agreement between Japan and Taiwan on fisheries in the East China Sea is very important. We see it, frankly, as a model for the peaceful resolution through diplomatic means of practical problems relating to resources that derive from underlying disputes over maritime claims. The existence of territorial claims does not and should not preclude the ability of claimants to make common cause, to find peaceful and effective ways to work together, and particularly to responsibly share and manage the resources in the waters of the South China Sea or the East China Sea, whether we're talking about marine life and fishing, or whether we're talking about underseas hydrocarbon, oil and gas. This principle, which was also enunciated in President Ma's own East Asia Peace and Cooperation Initiative, This principle of peaceful resolution is germane to all of the disputes, and it is incumbent on all of the claimants to forswear intimidation, coercion, and other non-diplomatic or extra-legal means.
Help me understand how we are going to reconcile the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, and our economic relations with Taiwan and Taiwan's economic relations in the region. We all hope that we will be able to reconcile 10 countries in the Pacific on an agreement. We are including many of our major trading partners in that TPP agreement. Taiwan has a robust economic relationship with the United States. How do we see, and I think Taiwan's expressed interest in what's going on as far as the TPP is concerned, what is the administration's position as it relates to TPP and our economic ties with Taiwan and Taiwan's ties with the Pacific?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our long-term priority throughout the entire Asia-Pacific region is to help create an environment that is genuinely open to U.S. exports of goods and services. We stand for free trade, and we are working for free trade. In particular, my good friend and colleague, Ambassador Mike Froman, and my other colleagues at the U.S. Trade Representative are hard at work with 11 of our partners in the TPP process in an effort to conclude the current round. Now, the first job at hand for us is to successfully conclude TPP among the existing 12 members. But it is true, as you point out, Mr. Chairman, that Taiwan is an extremely important economy in the region and is an important trading partner for the United States. And on that basis, we have indicated that we welcome Taiwan's interest in the TPP. Now, as a practical matter, tomorrow, as I mentioned in my testimony, the same colleagues at the U.S. Trade Representative's Office will be meeting with Taiwan representatives under the TIFA talks, the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement. I think it's very important that these talks have restarted, that this effort is underway. Our principal focus is and should be on addressing the outstanding issues between the U.S. and Taiwan through this framework. We can, by doing so, build momentum for expanding our trade and investment regimes and demonstrating Taiwan's own ability to reform, take necessary reform measures on the trade front. I would add, if I may, that the U.S. and Taiwan have made great strides also in terms of investment, and that the active, robust, and effective participation of an impressive delegation from Taiwan in the Select USA Forum hosted by President Obama with Secretary Kerry and Secretary Pritzker late last year opened the door to a hoped-for increase in Taiwan investment in the United States.
We talked about the fact that we want matters resolved peacefully. We've talked about the fact that we want people sitting at the table resolving issues. So Taiwan needs to have a seat at the table in international discussions. We've strongly supported their ability to participate in aviation. How do you see the ability of Taiwan to have a meaningful role on the international stage to be able to protect the rights of the people that live in Taiwan, as well as the regional security, economic, and safety issues?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are convinced that Taiwan has a great deal to contribute to the international community. Taiwan has tremendous resources, it has tremendous experience and tremendous expertise. The world needs Taiwan's help in addressing a plethora of global challenges and issues, and consistent with the legislation that you co-sponsored, but more importantly, as a function of fundamental U.S. policy, we have and continue strongly to support Taiwan's active participation in international organizations for which statehood is not a requirement, but active and meaningful roles in other organizations as well. And we partner closely with Taiwan in a number of areas. In terms of organizations, as you know, Taiwan and we were successful in enabling its participation in the ICAO meetings late last year, and that is an area where we will continue to work. There are other organizations as well where we strongly advocate for an appropriate role for Taiwan. We think that increasing Taiwan's international space also affords its people dignity and helps provide it with the confidence it needs to engage China in cross-strait relations. And we make the case to the Chinese, Mr. Chairman, that it is in China's interest as well, from our perspective, to enable Taiwan appropriately to contribute.
Thank you. Senator Rubio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate it very much. We've read a lot and heard a lot about this rebalance towards Asia, and we've seen some actions in that regard. Of course, we're reevaluating our defense relationship with Japan and seeing how we can increase cooperation. They've got some internal constitutional issues they have to work through, but we've seen that. We've certainly seen a reinvigoration of our, or a re-upping of our situation with South Korea, and of course have a free trade agreement with them. And even with the Philippines, there's now talk about creating a rotational presence in terms of the U.S. being involved. We know they've now gone to arbitration on their claims with regards to China. So we've seen activity there. Tell us a little bit, what is the role of Taiwan in the U.S.'s rebalance or pivot towards Asia?
Thank you very much, Senator, for all of your work on these issues and for your thoughtful question. The Obama administration has placed a high priority on strengthening our unofficial relations with Taiwan as part of our overall rebalance to the Asia-Pacific region, in part because Taiwan shares our values and our commitment to democracy, in part because of the important history and ties that bind us, but also in part because of the dynamism and potential of the Taiwan economy. And therefore, our security cooperation, our economic cooperation, our people-to-people, and other forms of cooperation, including multinational cooperation, has continued to grow, and we see further room to grow. One outstanding example has been the role that Taiwan played in assisting in the relief efforts in response to Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. Another is the readiness with which Taiwan responded to the loss of Malaysian Air Flight 370 and actively contributed initially to the search and rescue efforts. We have reached an agreement last year on a visa waiver program status for Taiwan that has opened the door to tourism and the people-to-people exchange that will deepen ties and benefit the U.S., including through educational exchange. The TIFA talks that begin again in Washington tomorrow help us strengthen and expand our economic relationship. And the former Vice President of Taiwan, Vincent Hsiao, late last year led an extraordinary delegation of top CEOs interested in finding ways to expand investment in the United States. So I think that the economic connection between the U.S. and Taiwan relates directly to the economic underpinnings of our rebalance.
Well, because I don't want to run out of time, let me ask you in specific, because the world, everything is interrelated. I would venture to guess, and in fact, I'm pretty sure of the fact that Taiwan has watched with great interest what's happened with Crimea, where both the economic leverage that Russia has on Europe as a whole, and in particular on Ukraine, and of course its military abilities in comparison to the Ukraine, allowed Russia to basically invade and take a piece of land away from a neighbor and annex it and basically occupy it as they do today. And I would venture to guess that the similarities for the Taiwanese is pretty striking to the fact that in Taiwan, for example, even as early as last year, or as late as last year, our own defense analysis found that the primary purpose behind military investment by China is to prepare for a conflict in the Taiwan Straits. So what are we doing in that regard to ensure that that calculation does not change to the point where China believes they can move aggressively on retaking Taiwan without having any sort of consequence for it? In essence, their belief that they could pretty much replicate what Russia did to Crimea. What steps have we taken to ensure that that does not happen, that that balance is not unsettled to the point where you're actually inviting China to do something like that?
Thank you, Senator. First and foremost, the key underpinning of our policy, rooted in TRA, is our opposition to any effort to resolve the differences pertaining to Taiwan through intimidation, through coercion, or through military force. And maintenance of peace and stability in the cross straits is a top priority. That's why the Obama administration, long before the crisis in Crimea, the beginning of the president's first term, has taken such robust steps to enable Taiwan to maintain a sufficient self-defense capability, and by providing arms of a defensive character. The Obama administration has notified over $12 billion in arms sales to Taiwan already. And at least as important, the U.S. has intensified our dialogue and consultations with Taiwan on defense issues and on defense strategy. We similarly have a robust dialogue with China. Now, we do not, as a matter of policy, ever discuss or consult in advance with China regarding weapon sales to Taiwan or possible sales. But we do discuss the situation in the Strait regularly with China and make very clear to them our commitment not only to One China policy and the 3 U.S.-China joint communiques, but also to the Taiwan Relations Act.
Well, I don't know if we're going to do a second round since there's not that many folks here, but let me just ask you this, and again, because the world is interrelated. If, in fact, the United States reaches an agreement with Iran that allows Iran to enrich uranium and reprocess plutonium, what would then, at that point, how would we go to Taiwan and say, you should never do this, however? We allow our enemies and our adversaries to enrich and to reprocess, but our friends like you who are similarly threatened, or feel threatened, I should say, are not allowed to provide. And how do we go to Taiwan or Korea or Japan, for that matter, and argue to them that they should continue to walk away from a nuclear weapons capability or an enrichment capability when we're basically, if in fact we acquiesce to other countries with hostile intentions having that sort of capability?
Senator, I don't accept the premise that the security of either Taiwan or Japan or Korea would be enhanced by an advancement of their or transformation of their peaceful civil nuclear programs into a nuclear weapons programs, and I see no evidence that the leaders in Taiwan or Japan or Korea are of that view either. In the case of Taiwan, as I said, we have an extensive ongoing set of consultations regarding Taiwan's legitimate self-defense needs. It begins with the software. It begins with the strategy, and we have significantly advanced our discussions about the steps that Taiwan can and should take with regard to recruitment, retention, doctrine, asymmetric warfare capabilities, and decisions about necessary weapons flow from that strategy. More broadly, I think that the lesson that our allies, Japan and Korea, derive from the Iran experience is that strong unity and resolve can compel an unwilling nation to make the decision to pursue serious negotiations as the way out. And this very much informs our approach and our strategy to North Korea, which is perhaps the closest analogy.
And by the way, I don't dispute that the current leadership in South Korea and Japan and Taiwan do not want to pursue a weapons program, but I think that's largely built on the security assurances that the U.S. has historically made to all three of those countries over time. And I would just say that if over time those assurances erode, either because our own capabilities are eroded through budget cuts and other means, or because they come to question how committed the U.S. is to actually following through on these sorts of things, I think that people's calculations could change, and that's a concern that I have about the region as a whole. I mean, it's not, there's a reason why both India and Pakistan now have nuclear weapons. There's multiple examples around the world where countries decide that they must provide for their own security. And I point to the situation in Crimea simply because the Ukraine possessed the world's third largest nuclear weapons stockpile at the end of the Cold War, and decided to walk away from that on assurances from the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia that that coalition would provide for their security. As it turns out, one of the three countries that was supposed to provide for their security ended up invading them. So I do think that over time this could have an impact on the thinking of leaders, and I just think that's important for us to keep in mind as we discuss why it's so important for the U.S. to have a robust commitment and capability to provide the mutual defense of our allies in the region, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. And that was the point I was trying to get to, is if in fact that is ever eroded in combination with any sort of agreement that allows hostile countries to enrich or reprocess, it could lead countries to conclude in the future that perhaps they're on their own. And if they're on their own, then they may need to pursue these sorts of what they would view insurance policies.
Senator Rubio, I think you're making an extraordinarily important point, and I could not agree more that the credibility and the sustainability of the U.S. commitment that the Asia-Pacific is a strategic priority, and that our presence, including as a security guarantor, is not in question, is a paramount objective for U.S. foreign policy and for the Obama administration. That conviction underlies the President's decision to travel later this month to Japan, to Korea, to Malaysia, to the Philippines, three treaty allies and a close friend and security partner of the United States. We are determined, for the reasons that you stated, and simply for the longer-term U.S. interest, to demonstrate our resolve and the robustness of our active engagement and participation, both as a security partner and as an economic partner.
Yeah, sure. No, go ahead.
Do you want me to? Here's my last question. It's not an unreasonable hypothetical. So, for example, this will have an impact on the whole region, but this is a region you oversee in general. So, as you're aware, the Philippines is currently involved in a dispute with China over some territory. And as a result, they have taken that case to arbitration before a panel that I believe, will rule in their favor. They're hopeful will. The Chinese, of course, have made very strong threats against that and what that could mean. Do you believe it is possible that at any time in the near future we could see China by force take these territories that they're disputing now with the Philippines? And if so, if they did so, what do you think the U.S. response would be, and how would that be viewed by Taiwan and others in the region in particular? What impact would that have? If in fact, let me ask it this way. If in fact China basically just by force took Scarborough away from the Philippines and nothing happened, there was no impact of it, and as I've heard some say, we're not going to go to war over some rocks, how would that impact the thinking in Taiwan and in other nations in the region with regards to the U.S. security commitment?
Well, Senator, as your question implies, there is no doubt but that the U.S. allies in the region watch carefully how we are dealing with China in areas of potential dispute, the Taiwan Straits being one, the East China Sea and the South China Sea being others. Right now, the South China Sea and the East China Sea have heated up, and there is a particular focus by the Chinese, who are deploying large numbers of Coast Guard vessels to the area of the Second Thomas Shoal, where the Philippines has since 1999 maintained an outpost, and conducting problematic behavior, including efforts to interfere with and interdict the routine resupply of the small garrison at that outpost. Without treading on the treacherous ground of answering a hypothetical question per se, let me tell you this. I know that the President of the United States and the Obama administration is firmly committed to honoring our defense commitments to our allies. There should be no doubt about the resolve of the United States. We stand by our allies and we stand by our commitments. That said, there is no reason why the issues pertaining to the South China Sea cannot be resolved through peaceful means. Diplomacy is the preferred vehicle, and when diplomacy doesn't yield results, states parties to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea have the legitimate right to access the existing international legal mechanisms. That access, the filing of a claim under the tribunal at UNCLOS, occurred last weekend, and is perhaps the proximate reason why the Chinese are expressing their anger and discontent on the sea through what to us appears to be intimidating steps. The President of the United States met with President Xi Jinping of China in The Hague earlier this month. He has had something on the order of 17 or 18 meetings with Chinese presidents and prime ministers since he took office. To the best of my knowledge, in every single meeting, President Obama made clear to his Chinese counterparts that the use of force, the use of coercion, the threat of force, and other means of intimidation are unacceptable as vehicles for advancing China's territorial claims. And the President has left the Chinese leadership in no doubt of our resolve. Now, all that said, Senator, the fact is that there are diplomatic steps underway between China and the 10 ASEAN countries. There are also important discussions underway among the 4 ASEAN claimants themselves. We're confident that there are diplomatic paths to move forward on the disputes relating to the South China Sea, and we hope, although we don't take a position on the claims, that the net effect of the Philippine filing in the tribunal will be to encourage China to clarify its own claims in ways that are consistent with international law and remove the ambiguity that is destabilizing in our view.
Thank you, Senator Rubio. I think this is a really important line of questioning, and so I want to continue it with you, Secretary, and ask it in one of Senator Rubio's questions in just a slightly different way. I'm filling in for Senator Cardin here, but I normally chair the Subcommittee on European Affairs, so I've spent a good deal of the last 3 months in Ukraine and thinking about Ukraine, and so let me sort of make that connection again here. There is a theory that suggests that if Russia gets away with this extraterritorial incursion into Crimea without consequences and without serious crippling consequences, more likely to be on the economic side than on the military side, then that sends a message to other countries that may be considering similar extraterritorial action. It may send a message to elements within those countries that are trying to push for extraterritorial action, that you can move on a disputed area or on another country without consequence. And the country that is most frequently brought up with respect to how this psychology may work is clearly China. And so you've answered some of these questions, but I want to ask you directly about that suggestion that people have made, that if Russia effectively gets away with this without the United States and Europe delivering a substantial blow to Russian interests, do you agree that that sends a message to maybe not China writ large, but elements within China that may be contemplating the kind of action that Senator Rubio is talking about with respect to the Philippines or the Senkaku Islands or, God forbid, Taiwan, that would give them additional reason to consider that kind of action, given how the next several weeks and months play out in Crimea, Ukraine, and Russia?
Well, thank you very much, Senator. And of course, this is a question that we are looking at very carefully. For my part, I approach it from the perspective of the Assistant Secretary for East Asia and the Pacific, and so I'll stipulate at the outset that I'm no expert on the Ukraine, Crimea, or Russia. What I can report, Senator, is that the widespread perception in the region is one of, in the first instance, alarm at Russia's behavior and a deep interest and an intense attention on the response taken by the United States and the European Union, acting in concert to rebuke the action, to condemn it, and to begin to impose consequences as a result. I would characterize the response broadly within East Asia, and particularly among the Southeast Asian countries where there are contentious territorial claims with China, as one that has heightened their concern about the possibility of China increasingly threatening force or other forms of coercion to advance their territorial interests. The net effect of this, I think, is to put more pressure on China to demonstrate that it remains committed to the peaceful resolution of problems. That is China's asserted position. And the tolerance in the region for steps by China that appear to presage a more muscular approach has gone down as their alarm over Russian action and annexation of Crimea has increased.
Well, I certainly understand what the reaction would be from China's neighbors. I guess my question is more putting on your China expert hat. What do we know about China's interpretation of the events that have taken place, and how will they interpret the consequences that flow or do not flow to Russia moving forward? Or are they just not thinking about it in those terms?
Thank you, Senator. There's no doubt that China is thinking hard about the implications of Russia's annexation of Crimea and the international response. And of course, I would have to let the Chinese speak for themselves. It's difficult to guess what is in their heart of hearts. But it is fair to say, Senator, that the extent of Chinese interdependence in economic terms with the United States and with its Asian neighbors is such that the prospect of the kind of incremental retaliatory steps that are gradually being imposed on Russia in terms of its banks, in terms of cronies, and in other areas, should have a chilling effect on anyone in China who might contemplate the Crimea annexation as a model.
Let me ask for your thoughts on the protests that have erupted in Taiwan with respect to this new economic agreement with China. There's reports out today that there's a new piece of legislation that would require the cabinet to regularly engage with lawmakers and the public on future agreements with China. Some initial reports that the protesters are suggesting that's not enough for them to end their occupation of government buildings. I appreciate an update on these protests from the State Department's perspective, and maybe your take on what this says about the broader disagreement within Taiwan about the future course of relations with China.
Well, thank you, Senator. I mean, in the first instance, what it says is that Taiwan is a very robust democracy with a high tolerance for the expression of political views. Now, obviously, the United States very much hopes that the students and demonstrators will use that freedom responsibly, that they will behave in a civil and in a peaceful manner, and certainly to avoid violence. But it's a reflection of a very open society in which debate is not only allowed but encouraged. There are several issues at play. In the first instance, I would say that one issue under contention has to do with the mechanism and the procedure by which the cross-straits agreement in question, which is an agreement on trade and services, has been moved through the legislative yuan, through the Taiwan Parliament. That is something of a procedural issue. There is also undoubtedly a substantive issue at play with mixed views within the Taiwan community, as you allude to the pace and the scope of agreements being reached between Taiwan and the PRC. As a general matter, we very much welcome and applaud the extraordinary progress that has occurred in cross-strait relations under the Ma administration. And I should add that, because it takes two to tango, that on the Beijing side, there is real credit due as well. The current foreign minister, Wang Yi, is a former head of the Taiwan Affairs Office. The current head of the Taiwan Affairs Office in Beijing is a good friend of ours, former Vice Foreign Minister Zhang Jijun. There is an extremely productive and deep dialogue underway across the Straits, which recently culminated in a visit by the Mainland Affairs Office Minister Wang to China, which was an extraordinary and historic milestone. We don't, however, take a view on any particular agreement, and we believe strongly that the pace and the scope of movement in cross-straits discussions must be one that is in accord with the comfort level and the wishes of the people on both sides of the strait.
Sure. Well, just to finish up, I really appreciate the way in which you framed the answer to that question. We're obviously, watching these protests closely, but it does demonstrate the initial point you made, I think, in the answer to Senator Rubio's first question about Taiwan's role with respect to our rebalance to Asia, and that it is a nation, maybe uniquely, that shares American values about the ability and the right of individuals to take part in government, protest their government, and as concerning as it may be to read about people occupying government buildings at the same time, it's a symbol of the important connection that we have with Taiwan regarding their ability to allow folks in that part of the world to speak for themselves. Senator Rubio? I
just have one final kind. I forgot. Sorry, I neglected to ask. We were having a good conversation about the other issues, but does the Obama administration remain committed to President Reagan's so-called 6 assurances to Taiwan. Is that still our position?
Senator, thank you. The underpinning of our policy is our One China policy, the 3 U.S.-China joint communiques, and the Taiwan Relations Act. But the quote-unquote 6 assurances that you're referring to continue to play an important part as an element of our approach to Taiwan and the situation across the strait.
All 6 of them remain the policy of the United States?
What I would say, Senator, is that in the context of the agreements that I mentioned, what's known as the 6 assurances comprise an ongoing element of our approach to the Taiwan question.
I guess my concern now is why can't the answer be yes, all 6, we remain committed to all 6 of them as elements of our foreign policy? Why are you unable to say that?
Well, what I'm trying to communicate, Senator, is that the underpinning of our approach to Taiwan is the One China policy, the 3 communiques, and the Taiwan Relations Act. That having been said, what's known as the 6 assurances, which date back to the Reagan administration, as you say, are things that we take seriously and remain important elements as we formulate practical policies vis-a-vis.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the answer because on a number of occasions after meeting with the President, the Chinese have actually misrepresented. In fact, in one instance, the Chinese actually said that the U.S. policy towards Taiwan was evolving and changing. And so I understand you're not the decision maker about what our policy is, but I must say I am concerned that I'm unable from the administration today to get a statement that these 6 assurances remain, all 6 remain things we are firmly committed to, as opposed to simply things that inform us or elements of our policy. So I am not wrong then to leave here today and say that all 6 assurances remain elements of our policy, but they are no longer necessarily the cornerstone of our policy, or that the administration is not prepared to say that we remain committed to all 6 in their totality, as understood by President Reagan when he enunciated them.
I'm not familiar with categorical statements of that nature in this or in recent administrations, and I think, Senator, that it's wisest to approach the challenges of Taiwan based on the agreements and the legislation that I've described, but mindful of the important elements that are captured in what you refer to as the 6 agreements, including, for example, principles that we continue to abide by, such as our unwillingness to engage in any sort of prior consultations or discussions with the Chinese regarding arms sales, just as an example.
All right, so let me just ask this then. It continues to be the policy of the United States that we will maintain the capacity of the United States to resist any resort to force or other forms of coercion that would jeopardize the security or the social or economic system of the people on Taiwan? That remains our policy?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
Secretary Russell, thank you very much, and again, we appreciate and have a safe trip to Asia.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
We'll now move to our second panel. We first have Mr. Abraham Denmark, Vice President for Political and Security Affairs at the National Bureau of Asian Research. Mr. Denmark manages a team of experts and staff to bring objective, detailed analysis of geopolitical trends and challenges in Asia to the attention of Congress and other policymakers. And he's joined by Mr. Randy Shriver, President and Chief Executive Officer of Project 2049 Institute, a nonprofit research organization dedicated to the study of security trend lines in Asia. He's also a founding partner in the Armitage International LLC and a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome. We welcome both of you, and we'll start with Mr. Denmark. And as I've indicated earlier, your full statements will be made part of the record, and you may proceed as you wish.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for this opportunity to testify on the important issue of U.S.-Taiwan relations and the 35th anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act. And I should add, as a resident of Silver Spring, it's especially a pleasure to be here today.
That's why you're going first.
I appreciate it. I would also like to thank the subcommittee for holding a hearing on the TRA, the Senate's first in 15 years. The National Bureau of Asian Research was founded 25 years ago in the memory of Senator Henry M. Jackson. Senator Jackson voted in favor of the Taiwan Relations Act in 1979, as did a bipartisan group of 85 senators. Since that vote, the TRA has been instrumental in preserving the stability in the Taiwan Strait and the rest of the region, fostering the growth of a robust democracy, enabling the emergence of the world's most innovative economies, and sustaining American presence and influence in the region. The TRA has also provided the strategic environment in which Taiwan and the PRC have been able to pursue stronger ties in recent years. Relations between the U.S. and Taiwan are founded upon common interests in regional stability, shared commitments to the principles of economic and political liberalism, and a mutual respect for international law. Taiwan was America's 12th largest trading partner in 2013, with two-way trade surpassing $63 billion. Taiwan is also a major security partner of the United States. Since 2009, the executive branch has notified Congress of over $12 billion in new defense articles and services for Taiwan, making Taiwan one of our top foreign military sales customers in Asia and one of the largest in the world. In recent years, the TRA has also enabled Taiwan to emerge as an important player in regional geopolitics. Taiwan's international behavior exemplifies that of a responsible power, from contributing to international disaster responses in Japan and the Philippines to demonstrating a constructive approach to addressing maritime disputes through its East China Sea Peace Initiative. Today, relations between Taipei and Beijing are quite positive. Since 2008, Taiwan and the PRC have reduced cross-strait tensions and focused on building economic and cultural ties. The results have been quite extraordinary. In 2013, for example, cross-strait trade rose to $197 billion. Still, despite the cross-strait rapprochement, all is not well in the cross-strait relationship. The PRC's investment in military capabilities positioned across from Taiwan has continued unabated, and Beijing has refused to renounce the use of force. The PLA has amassed a force of more than 1,100 ballistic missiles along the Taiwan Strait as part of a layered, multidimensional military capability that remains primarily focused on Taiwan-related contingencies. At the same time, Taiwan's investment in its own military capabilities has been stagnant. Taiwan's official defense budget for 2013 was $10.5 billion, while in the same year the PRC spent more than 10 times that, of $112 billion. The result has been an increasingly unbalanced cross-strait military dynamic. To address this imbalance, Taiwan's military has begun to pursue innovative asymmetric strategies to deter the PRC. The U.S. and Taiwan should continue to work closely with one another to enhance Taiwan's ability to defend itself. Moreover, policy coordination on political military issues should also be an important part of the bilateral relationship. Taiwan could potentially play a significant role in shaping the security environments of both the East and South China Seas. Further, progress should be made in formalizing a bilateral investment agreement with the U.S. and bringing Taiwan into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This would encourage Taipei to make significant progress in the liberalization of its economy, while also diversifying Taiwan's economic relationships and diluting the PRC's ability to coerce Taiwan in a time of crisis. The future of the cross-strait dynamic is uncertain. However, how Beijing's leaders may react to a DPP electoral victory and will ultimately calculate the success of its current engagement strategy with Taiwan and how it will weigh that strategy against alternatives is unclear. To conclude, the Taiwan Relations Act has for 35 years been the foundation for a robust relationship between Washington and Taipei that has grown to include all elements of national power. Preserving and expanding the benefits of the TRA will be a necessary element in America's efforts to sustain its power and influence in the Asia-Pacific, to maintain regional stability, and to promote its interests and values throughout the region. Thank you again for inviting me today.
Thank you. Mr. Schreiber?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity, and thank you for seating me with a colleague who I admire and respect a great deal, Mr. Denmark. In the interest of time, I'd just like to draw from my statement and just make a few observations on cross-strait relations, the U.S.-Taiwan relationship, and maybe some recommendations for going forward. As I think both Secretary Russell and Mr. Denmark stated, the cross-strait relationship has enjoyed a lot of positive developments in recent years, and I believe President Ma deserves enormous credit for that. The ECFA agreement, the 21 agreements that have been achieved between the two sides. But there are some concerning trends, and I would just make note of 4 trends, and one has already been addressed, I think, quite eloquently, and that's the security environment. The military buildup opposite Taiwan continues apace. There's been no move to reduce the threat posture. In fact, it's continued to build despite the political improvements and the economic progress the two sides have made. I think we're also concerned about Taiwan's need for international space and the continuing pressure from Beijing on other countries and on international organizations to prevent Taiwan from enjoying greater participation in international organizations and the international community. Number 3, I think we should also be concerned about these demonstrations, but more broadly what it says about the public and their views of the cross-strait relationship right now. Having just been in Taiwan last week, former Deputy Secretary Armitage and I took a group to Taiwan and had a chance to wander through some of these areas. And what is really at the core of the protest, I think, is very deep-seated anxiety about the future of the cross-strait relationship and what that might mean for Taiwan's status. So yes, the proximate cause is this cross-strait service trade agreement, but I think there's a very deep-seated anxiety, if not neuralgia, about where things are going, and that could put a break a bit on future cross-strait progress, and that's certainly something to be mindful of. And then lastly, I think we need to look ahead at the coming 2016 election and look at China's behavior in the past as Taiwan has held national elections. They, in the past, have conducted provocative missile exercises. They've made intimidating gestures and speeches to the public in Taiwan. And I think we should expect, particularly with where the polls are today, that China will try to put its thumb on the scales and influence the outcome of that election. And I think it's in our interest to do what we can to ensure that Taiwan has the ability to make decisions about its future by itself, free of coercion to the extent possible. Now, I think each of these trends that I mentioned suggest a role for the United States to support Taiwan and address Taiwan's needs. And I think they fall into several categories. I think in the security area, we should be moving forward with some of the major weapon systems. I would cite submarines, a program that I was part of the decision-making in 2001 in the Bush administration when we said that Taiwan needed these platforms and committed the U.S. to helping Taiwan acquire the platforms. But yet here we are 13-plus years later, and there's no program to speak of. And I think the requirement has only gotten more strong given China's submarine development and other military modernization efforts. I think the United States should make a cabinet-level visit to Taiwan. The Clinton administration sent 3 cabinet secretaries to Taiwan in 8 years. This administration has sent 0, like the administration just before it, the Bush administration. I think the United States should be more positive and more open about Taiwan's interest in TPP. We should be talking about a roadmap and the ability of Taiwan to join that organization, not just welcome their interest in it. I understand the TIFA process is being resumed this week, but we should articulate a stronger interest in Taiwan joining that organization and provide a clear roadmap for their participation down the line. And then finally, on arms sales more generally, I mentioned the submarine program in particular. I think this country should be committed to Taiwan's defense in a way that we have regular congressional notifications. The previous witness from the administration's comments notwithstanding about all the support we've given to Taiwan's military, it has in fact been the longest period of gap in congressional notifications in the history of the relationship since the Taiwan Relations Act was passed, 2.5+ years since the last congressional notification. I think this should be remedied. Taiwan not only needs the military systems, they need that show of support from the United States. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you both for your testimony. It's the 35th anniversary of the formal agreement in regards to Taiwan, the Taiwan Relations Act. It's pretty specific as to our commitments in regards to Taiwan and our strong interest to make sure that peaceful relations are between on the cross-strait issues, that Taiwan has the right of self-defense and our commitment to help them in self-defense. We have the 3 communiques, and then we have the President Reagan's comments on the assurances. Is there a need for, are the fundamental agreements still sound today? This is 35 years later. There seems to be some hesitation in regards to some of the areas that we thought were pretty clear. You point out that high-level visits have not taken place as frequently. There's arms sale issues. Is there a need for any formal changes, in your view, on the underlying documents that underpin the relationship between the United States and Taiwan?
Thank you, Senator. There have been several calls from the academic community here in D.C. and around the country for some sorts of changes to the Taiwan Relations Act, some saying that it needs to be weakened, some saying that it needs to be strengthened. In my opinion, overall, the Taiwan Relations Act is actually very sound in that it provides a robust foundation for engagement, but also gives the administration enough room to maneuver, to be flexible for existing and emerging contingencies. So overall, my assessment is that the Taiwan Relations Act in itself does not need to be revised, although the continuing discussion between the Congress and the administration, either with this administration and previously, about the pace of arms sales, the size of arms sales, the pace of visits, the pace of contacts, I think is very welcome in terms of pushing the relationship forward. But if you look at how the administration, how this administration has engaged Taiwan, I think it's actually been fairly robust. My friend Randy was very correct in the delay that we've seen, the lack of arms sales notifications that we've seen over the last 2 years. But I would say that a lot of that is because of the size of the significant notifications that came for a few years before that, leading to very significant notifications of arms sales and continued high-level meetings between political leadership on both sides. Not a visit of a cabinet secretary to Taiwan yet, but continued regular senior-level meetings between the two sides. I guess I don't see the visit of a cabinet secretary, of a cabinet-level officer to Taiwan as being the litmus test for what constitutes a robust relationship. Rather, it is the regular meeting, the regular interaction of high-level officials across multiple elements of our two governments, to me is the more important measure of our relationship. And to me, the current administration has been fairly robust in its engagement.
Let me ask you about U.S.-China relations as it relates to Taiwan. The United States has a somewhat complex relationship with China today. They are critically important in many of our discussions globally. How do you see what the United States does with Taiwan? This has been long-standing. Does it have impact on the bilateral relationship between China and the United States?
It certainly can, but my sense is many administrations, not just this one, try to overcompensate for the perceived reaction that we may get from China and place some limitations on what we would do with Taiwan. I think if you look at the actual record, we can stick with the subject of arms sales. I think if you actually look at the reaction, the fallout on the U.S.-China relationship has been consistent, quite predictable, and quite manageable. So I think that shouldn't really temper what we do with Taiwan. And I would add on a cabinet secretary, I think that's been one of the points of reluctance is fear that that particular cabinet secretary may not have continuing access to China should he or she visit Taiwan. But again, I think the past track record doesn't necessarily support that, and I think we should proceed. I obviously have a disagreement. I think it is important. We tell every other country it's important when our cabinet secretaries go, so I think this would be a very strong signal to Taiwan, particularly in light of what they're facing right now in the cross-strait relationship.
I think that's very important. Let me, one of the things I think Senator Rubio and I will agree is that President Reagan was pretty definitive with his assurances. I personally think China respects that, a clear understanding of where the United States is, consistent with our historical commitments to the people of Taiwan. So I think clear indication of where we stand helps not just the people of Taiwan, but also helps in our bilateral relationship with China. I want to ask one more question before turning over to Senator Rubio, and that's what came up with Secretary Russell. One of the positive impacts of a better relationship between Taiwan and China is that Taiwan's a democracy. It's an open society. China is struggling on how to deal with more rights for its citizens. It's had an inconsistent path towards the type of democratic reforms that a country needs to do if it wants to be a major player on the world stage. And yet, the recent protests in Taiwan raises questions as to how effective Taiwan is in dealing with these issues. How do you see these protests affecting the view in China as to the success of the Taiwan democracy?
Well, I think in this particular instance, it's probably a bit too soon to tell, but I think it's part of an overall picture that China's getting. They watch the elections, they watch the speeches of losing candidates and are amazed that people of wealth and privilege are willing to concede defeat and step away from power. They visit in greater numbers through tourism, and so they're seeing an awful lot, and I can't help but to think that it's impacting them. That said, what we see in China is, I think, a bit of a heavier hand on the internet, on religious freedom, on human rights organizations. So I believe, just sort of intuitively, that the lessons are sinking in and are impacting people in China, but it's certainly yet to show up in how the authorities in Beijing are governing the PRC.
I'm going to turn the gavel over to Senator Rubio. As indicated earlier, we have a markup going on in one of the committees I serve on, and Senator Rubio, take as much time as you want.
Thank you. And I too have to go to a meeting, but there's a couple of important questions that I wanted to ask you. First, and Senator Cardin just outlined this, I wanted to get back to this topic of the 6 assurances under the Reagan administration, because I think they're, to be clear and unequivocal with regards to that, is critically important in terms of the message that we send and, quite frankly, the balance in the region. I asked that question of Secretary Russell a moment ago. You were both in the audience and you heard his answer. And I wanted to get your impressions after hearing. I tried multiple different ways to get someone from the administration to tell me that the 6 assurances remain the cornerstone of our policy and an important part of that we still stand by those assurances. I don't think I got that, and I wanted your interpretation of the answer that we got with regards to that question.
I was surprised that it wasn't a more direct response and that it couldn't be made in the affirmative. Certainly when we were in government, we would have said absolutely yes, and did on many occasions. So I hope the administration has the opportunity to clarify that, because I think the signal that it sends is a reassuring one if our friends in Taiwan know that they still apply in their totality, as your question asked.
Mr. Denmark, did you have a comment on the?
Sure. Thank you, Senator. I think the 6 assurances, as you said, are incredibly important in our relationship. While I certainly can't speak for the administration, it is my sense that U.S. policy regarding Taiwan, including the 6 assurances, had not changed. There were some public comments from other administration officials a few weeks ago on this topic, specifically after the Chinese Foreign Ministry misreported interactions between President Obama and President Xi, which stated explicitly that U.S. policy towards Taiwan had not changed. And I assume that that's still the guiding remarks from the administration.
Yeah, I would hope that that's the case. I again, tried on multiple occasions to get a direct answer, a yes or no. Yes, they remain part of our strategy, and it seems like there are elements of our strategy that might inform us, according to the answer that I got. And I hope we can bring some clarity to it, because I was surprised by the answer myself, and I felt that I didn't think it was a hard question. I just wanted to get it in the record. And unfortunately, we didn't get the answer we want, which I think actually is counterproductive. In fact, I think that in China, that answer that was given here today could potentially be misinterpreted as, in fact, an opening of some sort for a change in the U.S. posture towards Taiwan. I am very concerned about the answer that we got, and I hope that we can bring some clarity to it over the next few days. And I intend to ask that question as well in writing of the Secretary of State to get clear assurances that that remains a cornerstone of our policy. I wanted to ask one more question. Mr. Denmark, this ties to your statement, although I'd love to hear from both of you about it. You talked a little bit about the relations between Taipei and Beijing are generally very positive due to policy decisions of the leadership of both sides that since 2008 decided to reduce the tensions and focus on building economic and cultural ties. And you say in your written statement that Beijing initially approved of this approach with the expectation that improving cross-strait economic and cultural ties would gradually pull Taiwan more closely to the PRC's orbit, thus enabling eventual unification. Yet trends so far have not borne this out. And given, for example, even the events that are going on today with student protests regarding potential increased links with China, given that assessment, what impact do both of you think that now has on Chinese thinking? In essence, they've allowed this little opening to occur under the hopes that this would slowly but surely bring Taiwan closer to them until ultimately there would be a mutually agreed to unification. Now they're seeing this sort of dynamic internally where people are saying, we don't want to be closer to China. What impact could that have, in your mind, on how China approaches this relationship moving forward?
Thank you, Senator. It's a fascinating set of issues, a very difficult set of questions. Overall, my sense is that Beijing remains committed to its approach in terms of engaging Taiwan, although with all due caveats of anybody's ability outside of Zhongnanhai in Beijing to read the thinking and feelings of Chinese senior leadership. So with that as a caveat, my sense is that they remain committed to engagement because they do see benefits, political, economic, and strategic benefits for the engagement, but also the counterpart to it, the alternatives to that strategy, remain very unclear in terms of if they'd be more beneficial to China's overall strategy. My sense, talking to scholars in China and from what I've read coming out of China, is that there's a lot of focus on the results of the election in 2016. That there's a lot of concern in China that the election, that if the DPP were to win power back, that Taiwan may revert back to the policies of Chen Shui-bian. My sense is that the DPP is actually moving beyond that approach, that would probably not happen again if the DPP were to win the next election. The DPP is actually going through a process of internally thinking about its own cross-strait policy, its own approach to these issues, and is working on a new formulation. And my sense is that Beijing, should the DPP win, Beijing would try to find some way to continue to work with them, to continue this form of engagement. As Randy pointed out earlier, I think it's very important that there have been reports of the mainland attempting to influence elections, and I suspect that this would probably continue because they see the importance of the election to Taiwan's behavior, and how post-2016 the mainland may calculate its options, may calculate the continued attractiveness of this engagement strategy, I think is one too far for anybody to predict, especially outside of Zhongnanhai. But also the variables, the calculations are just far too complicated at this point to see really how Beijing may react to that scenario.
Thank you, Senator. I think China's policies haven't changed and probably won't for the foreseeable future, but with the trends in Taiwan, particularly the public polling about how people feel about their eventual status after the current status quo, one wonders, does Beijing have unlimited patience? I suspect they don't, because their ultimate objective appears to be getting further away. Their ultimate objective is clear. They want unification, or what they call reunification. The polling suggests that goal is getting further away. which is why I think our support for Taiwan's security needs remain very relevant even in this era when there's improvements in the cross-strait political and economic relationship. If Beijing understands its policies aren't bringing it closer to its ultimate objective, then the option of the use of force could become more attractive, particularly if we're not doing our part in helping Taiwan with its defense needs.
Well, and that, first of all, I appreciate both of you being here today, and thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your time. That is exactly our concern, that any sort of weakening or questioning or equivocation on the part of U.S.'s stance towards Taiwan, in fact, invite miscalculation or recalculation on the part of the Chinese. And if people think that what's happening in Crimea is complicated, they have no idea what any sort of territorial dispute in this part of the world would look like. It would be incredibly destabilizing, would have an immediate impact on the way Japan and South Korea and other nations portray themselves. And I think the two nations who right now feel the most immediately threatened by the aggressiveness of the Chinese government, one is the Philippines, because they simply don't have the capability, and the other is Taiwan. And it is, I think, that any sort of weakening or any sort of confusion about where the U.S. stands in our commitment to this relationship invite potential aggressiveness and aggression in a way that could end up finding us in a conflict that's much more complicated and, in fact, much more dangerous than even what we're seeing around the world today. So, again, I thank you both for being here and for your time and for your testimony. The record for this hearing will remain open until the close of business Friday. Members and others will be allowed to submit stuff for the record or ask questions, and I would just ask your cooperation that if you receive any questions between now and Friday, that you would answer them for the committee promptly so we can include it in our record. And with that, the committee stands adjourned.